Welcome to Keep Going, a podcast about failure and success, hosted by John Biggs. Every week, we talk to an amazing person about a time they failed and what they learned. And remember, when you're going through hell, keep going.
Back to Keep Going, a podcast about success and failure. I'm John Biggs. Today on the show we have Theron McCullough. He's a venture futurist is how you self-described. You're working on a couple projects, but I think today we're going to talk a little bit about your venture activities and what you think is going on in the venture space right now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah, so why don't you tell us about yourself?
Yeah, I've had what I'd feel is a pretty straight line, but most people look like it's gone all over the place. First graduating class at Techstars in 2007. That company had a small exit in 2010. I spent about 3 years in Europe working for an engineering company building paragliders and jumping off cliffs as a profession. And then came back to San Francisco, went to a company called Pivotal Software. They were acquired by EMC eventually. And then I built a lot of enterprise software, spun out my own consultancies. And through that, I built multiple companies. Talking about success and failure, I have my last company, Fifi, was deal flow management and system of record for private market investors. And that was a timing play. That was something that, I ended up shutting the doors after bootstrapping for 3 years, and then got into innovation banking. So I was a managing director at running the West Coast early stage practice. It was over 60% of our global revenue. And then I jumped to First Republic, and upon their demise, I was asked to go to Citizens Bank and help build out their private bank, which was 150 of us out of about 5,000 people at First Republic. So I spent the last couple of years building that out, building their Citizens for Startups program, and really bringing them to market.
Okay, so you're doing a little of everything, right? So you're working in finance, but you're also doing this a little more focus on funding. So I think at this point in the game, it feels like funding's kind of stymied. What do you think here? Because I think there's a lot of focus on AI that may be that's kind of like taking the air out of the room when it comes to just regular funding. Startup funding.
Yeah, I think there's a big change, and it's happening pretty readily. I've been focused a lot recently on what is the value of the venture capitalist, what are they bringing to the table? Because I think we have to, and it's been the case for a long time, you have to bring more than just a check. You have to bring some form of value. But I think that's even pushing further into, are you the marketing channel? Are you going to get me into the right players? Are you going to be able to make those type of intros? And also even yesterday, I talked with some founders where they have decent revenue. They've been growing probably 30% month over month. And they were asking me about venture and taking venture. And I said, well, maybe I can get you venture debt. And then we can get your valuation higher. And then we can go for a bigger round. And that cadence is now changing kind of how venture comes into play, whether you're coming in at, a pre-seed or a series B. And I think all that's changing pretty fast.
What does that mean? So you're talking about venture debt, right? So we're going to go a little esoteric here, but the idea of venture debt was never what a lot of founders wanted. They want a quick safe, and they want, I don't know, $1 million in hand as opposed to taking it out that way. So what's going to happen to the startup that's not AI? And what's going to happen to the startup that's focused on, I don't know, Fitbit for dogs or whatever?
Well, I think fundamentally we can start taking AI out of the conversation unless you're specifically not AI. I think everything is moving that way. It's kind of like denying the internet, where we're kind of here now, and it's just moving forward. I think there's combinations, right? Where if you're smart, you can say, well, I'll take some venture debt and I'll take some equity, and we can play those levers against each other. But at the end of the day, and I've seen so many horror stories of you have safe notes and then you stack your safe notes and you're offering discounts. And then if you can't exit, and if you hit this moat where you can't get to the next round of funding, then where do you land? You're trying to get off the balance sheet at a bank. They're trying to get you off the balance sheet because you can't raise enough money. And so then you go into this kind of mode of, are you going to get acquired at a discount? What are you actually left with at the end as a founder when you make that sale? And I think all those economics need to be considered. I also would think there is a lot more options now with private credit, different ways that you can go into market, different ways you can grow.
So let's talk about that a little bit. So you're talking to founders who may not be super savvy, right? So what's the what's currently the way to get to raise your seed round?
I think it's always, well, it's been the case definitely for the last several years is revenue, like proving revenue. But I think that's all what that's done is helped startups focus so much on that at some point they're like, wait a minute, if I have enough revenue, do I really need the venture investing? So I think at the end of the day, it's easier to build products using AI tools. It's easier to test and iterate on those products. And I'm using tools like Replit in the evening right now and just cranking out projects and ideas as MVPs. Like, it's not hard for me to convert that into a sellable product if I can see it either as a billion-dollar market play or something that could be supplemental, like a micro service within other services. So I think there's a lot of different ways to change that up. Another company I've been really bullish on is WAP, where they're just minting founders. They're like, hey, go through your university program, just set up a WAP account, and then you can actually start making money. And then you're doing a real life MBA. You're actually making money month over month, and you're figuring out how those mechanics work to then take your company to a larger scale. I think the opportunities are a lot bigger. The ability to produce MVPs, to test and iterate is a lot easier. At the end of the day, VCs still need to see the $1 billion exit. They still need to see the revenue marks there that say, hey, we can get there.
What are the $1 billion ideas right now?
I'm really interested in the pipes, I think, and the pipes being ChatGPT, Invisible, some of those where they're like, hey, it's pretty because it's so easy to build product now. It's how are we changing how we got from point A to point B? What is wrong with the current point A? And I think the A needs to change. A can iterate. You talk about even in climate tech, things like that is like, well, there's just a better way to do it now. And instead of starting with a legacy way of doing it, we can change the legacy to bring it up to speed to today and then move forward. So that's, I think, just mainly the pipes of how things are being done. And I even think of like cap tables and things like that. It's not hard for someone to build a cap table tool or to play that game, and then it becomes a zero-sum game. So what else are you going to do on top of that? Or even with investing, you're like, well, anybody can cut you a check. You can take money from most anybody if you have a great company. So what are those metrics that are actually going to move the needle for you that changes the pipes, that changes the way we do things?
Mm-hmm. What would you write a check for right now if you saw it? What are you looking for?
I think it's the boring subjects that have not been looked at. It's tax and advisory. Like, how does that change? It's the HR. It's hard tech, like hardware. How are we bringing all the mechanical hardware in the world up to speed to today with using sensors, with using AI? How are we treating agriculture? Those big industrial things, I think that can really be disrupted. And you can do it in a pretty simple way too. I think there's not too much you need to do to break into that market and then make a big change.
How does finance and banking change with AI? I mean, you're over at Silicon Valley Bank. Presumably Chase or those guys don't need tens of thousands of people working there anymore if the decisions can be made fairly precisely now.
Yeah, and a big part, I think you just need to level up, right? As an individual, you should be, I had a discussion not long ago, is if any engineer is not paying for an AI tool, you probably don't want to hire them, because they got to be doing it. Like, you have to be competitive in the market. I think, especially with finance and banking, what I'm looking at a lot is the super regional to regional banks and their tech stack and how are they going to market. If it's not going to be difficult to build payment rails, then who's the one that's building a white label payment rails for all these regional banks out there? Right? How are we? Because they're going to have not only to maintain customers or keep and grow, but also regulators are setting expectations on KYC and know your customer and being able to monitor and track nefarious actors and all that. And that all has to do with AI. That has to do with bringing you up to speed. There's another interesting company called Peoplelytics who's really kind of tackling the humans and how we all interact with those things. And you can go into a lot of different directions with that. And just, I think also for industry and legacy companies, it's how do we create 3 to 5% more efficiency? Because that could be a massive outcome for a lot of these brands, a lot of the bigger banks, things like that.
What does that do to folks who have been in the bank for X number of decades and just aren't ready to use aren't ready to use those tools, or even like accept those tools as valuable. I mean, there could be fear of hallucinations. I don't know. I personally don't want my spreadsheet to tell me that 2 + 2 = 17. So it's entirely feasible, right?
Yeah, we had that discussion recently also with, I guess, specifically more on audits, right? If someone comes to you and they're like, well, I've done my own audit using ChatGPT, like, well, I think there really needs to be a human in the loop here, right? And I think that's a big part of it. There's a discussion, a topic I love to bring up is who's going to be better at prompting? Is it the person with 20 or 30 years of experience, or is it the person right out of university or, that's trying to fix these problems? And I would say it's going to be the person with the experience, because they know how to prompt, they know how to look at all the scenarios better. So I think there's even more of a solid place for those, let's say, legacy players, those people that are in the senior roles that have been there for a long time, to be the human in the loop, to be the educator on, here's why we did it this way. Here's why, these are the outcomes we can expect. So as you build out these tools, those are the scientists that are going to make sure it's correct, are going to be doing the checks and the audits to make sure, wait, that, as you said, 2 + 2 is not 17. I know that. And through experience, here's the logic and how we got there. And I think that part is going to be key and crucial moving forward as well.
I mean, I think a lot of people think about it, LLMs versus machine learning, right? So machine learning is a little bit more precise, I think. Like an LLM is just going to spit out some information, and it's not going to know how many R's there are in strawberry. But with machine learning, you might have something different. What does the future look like? What do you expect in the next 5 years? What's going to change in the funding markets? What's going to change in finance?
That's a tough question to answer. I would say, in the next 5 months at this point, things are so dramatically changing. But I think it's going to be a lot more automation. I think it's also going to be trust, right? I think trust is going to be a huge area of, like, the only thing real is if I meet someone in person. Right. And if that's the case, then those people that know how to be in market, that know how to network, that know how to create communities are going to start to take the lead and saying, hey, these human interactions are actually key. They're actually important to building that trust, maintaining the trust, that network. And I think it's going to be so easy to fake all of that. So I think probably trust is going to be the number one thing. And then also maybe a scope around, the thesis, or the, like, what's right and what's wrong, how do we quantify that, and then how do you make sure that's built into the tools, and again, making sure the humans in the loop to check that, to have checks and balances.
Yeah, it's interesting that the idea of almost ethics, built-in ethics on these things, and how do you manage that as ethics? All right, how can people find out what you're working on? Where should people go?
Well, I'm going to be speaking soon in San Francisco at the Global PR Summit. That's December 3rd and 4th. I'm really excited about that. You can find me there. My handle, one other fortunate piece to being in this game since 2005, 2006 is you can find me most places at Theron. And for my Twitter handle, LinkedIn, things like that. But if you just search for that, you'll be able to find me. I'm open to, I love having conversations with any LPs, GPs, PE firms, founders. And back to that theory, I treat venture as the spirit of venture, and each one of them needs a component, which is the LPs and GPs, is the startups in the portfolio, and then the wealth that comes out of it. And why the wealth is because that's what goes and becomes the next LPs, the next GPs, the next founders. And so any conversations around that I'd love to have.
Oh, very cool. Well, Theron, thank you for joining us. It's been fascinating.
Yeah. Thank you, John.
All right. This has been Keep Going. I'm John Biggs. We'll see you next week.
Thank you for listening to Keep Going, a podcast about success and failure. Remember, Keep Going is entirely listener supported. If you're listening to this, please head over to keepgoingpod.com, where you can subscribe to the podcast for as little as $5 a month. This is a labor of love, and every little bit helps. Thanks for listening.